The vibration of the departure gate announcement was still humming through the carpet when my father, Gerald Morrison, turned to the woman who had paid for every seat on that flight and said, without a flicker of hesitation, "We never booked you a seat, go back." The words landed like a slap in a silent room. I did not gasp. I did not look to my mother for guidance. I set my carry-on bag down on the polished airport floor and tilted my head, watching the slight, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth, the tell of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was already congratulating himself on his delivery. My grandmother Eleanor stood frozen, her worn leather handbag clutched to her chest. Her knuckles were white. "I am Charlotte Morrison, 29 years old, a certified trust and estate paralegal with 7 years of experience handling property transfers and probate filings that would make most attorneys weep into their coffee. I have watched families tear themselves apart over dining room tables and hospital bedsides. I have seen cruelty dressed in Sunday clothes. But I had never seen a man abandon his own mother at a boarding gate after she had handed him $30,000 for a family vacation. I took her hand, the one with the calloused knuckles that had kneaded dough and weeded gardens for 6 decades, and I walked her away from the gate without a single word of explanation. The hydraulic hiss of the jet bridge closing behind us felt like a door ceiling shut on a version of my life I would never have to live again. Tell me what city you are listening from, because I need to know that somewhere out there, someone else understands what it means to stand at that exact threshold and choose yourself over the performance of family. If you have ever sat in a room where your own blood treated you like an inconvenient stranger, if you have ever watched the people who raised you rewrite reality in real time, making you wonder if your memory was the faulty one, then you know the particular coldness that settles in your chest when the mask finally slips. I am telling you this story not because I am special, but because I believe there are others like me. The quiet ones, the ones who file the paperwork and hold the keys and never raise their voices, the ones who understand that justice is not a feeling, it is a process. If what I say next resonates with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement tells the algorithm that stories like this matter, that quiet women who win without screaming deserve to be heard. Now, let me take you back to how this nightmare started. The world before that moment was the Morrisons' suburban home on Maplewood Lane, a sprawling colonial with cream-colored siding and a manicured lawn that my mother Patricia maintained with the ferocity of a general defending a border. The house had been my grandfather Herbert's pride. He had bought it in 1987 for $162,000, a figure my father still quoted as if it were a sacred text. Herbert died of a heart attack in his workshop when I was 11, leaving behind a widow, a half-finished birdhouse, and a set of principles he had carved onto a piece of pine that hung above his workbench. True worth isn't in what you own, but in what you leave behind for those who deserve it. My grandmother Eleanor kept that plaque after he died, along with his old house key on a worn leather keychain that she carried everywhere, a little piece of him that jingled in her pocket like a promise. The family dynamic was a triangle of mutual exploitation, and I was the unacknowledged base that held the whole structure upright. My father Gerald was a man who had built a career on saying, "Let's just keep the peace," while actively enabling every cruelty that crossed his path. He worked in middle management at a regional insurance firm, a job that required him to do precisely nothing with confidence. My mother Patricia was the architect. She planned every holiday, every argument, every passive-aggressive remark with surgical precision. Her favorite phrase was, "for appearance's sake," which she deployed like a crowbar to pry compliance out of anyone who questioned her. She dressed in beige cashmere, drove a silver Lexus that was always perfectly clean, and had never once in my memory said a word of genuine warmth. And then there was Derek, my younger brother by 3 years, the golden child who had inherited my father's talent for passivity and my mother's gift for manipulation. He worked in sales at a tech startup, a job that allowed him to talk about himself at length while pretending to listen. Whenever conflict threatened his comfort, he would shrug and say, "It's just business, Char," as if the word business sanctified any betrayal. For 7 years, from the day I graduated college with honors in legal studies until that morning at the departure gate, I had played the role of the invisible fixer. I was the one who managed my grandmother's medical appointments, sorted her mail, dealt with the property tax notices that she could no longer understand. I was the one who sat beside her at the kitchen table and explained why the bank statement showed a $30,000 wire transfer to an account at a law firm she did not recognize, and I was the one who watched her eyes go distant and then clear, as if she remembered something she had been told not to share. "I'll take care of it, Grammy," I said, and she squeezed my hand with a strength that surprised me. I had a key to her cottage, the small two-bedroom house at the back of the property that my mother referred to as the embarrassment, because its paint was peeling, and its garden was overgrown with tomatoes that Alina refused to stop planting. The cottage was my sanctuary, the only place in that whole overdecorated empire where I could breathe. My wardrobe was a study in deliberate invisibility. Dark slacks, white blouses, practical flats, a single gold stud earring in each ear. I dressed like someone who needed to be taken seriously, but not noticed, a background figure in the expensive theater of my family's life. My mother dressed me differently. When I was a child, pink ruffles, patent leather shoes, bows that pinched my scalp. But I had outgrown that performance the same way I had outgrown the belief that love could be earned through labor. Now I dressed for function. I needed to be able to move files, open cabinets, sit on floorboards without worrying about the crease in my trousers. I was a paralegal, and my tools were paper and patience. The specialist I would later hire first appeared in my life as a name on a letterhead. Paul Brennan, estate attorney and forensic accountant, Brennan and Associates, with an office in a converted brownstone on the older side of town. My grandmother had hired him 6 months before the trip, though no one in the family knew. I found the engagement letter tucked into the back of her recipe box, written on heavy cream paper and folded into a neat square. The letter referenced an irrevocable trust and a deed of reversion. I did not open it further that day. I simply noted the name, memorized the address, and replaced the letter exactly as I found it. I knew, even then, that information was the only currency that mattered. The ally who would become my only real support was a man the family called the handyman. Tommy Chen had been coming to Alina's cottage for years to fix the leaky faucet, patch the roof over the back porch, replace the rotting window frame that let in the winter draft. He was small and quiet, wore a canvas tool belt over a faded blue work shirt, and spoke with the soft accent of someone who had grown up in 2 languages and chosen the gentler one for conversation. The family treated him like furniture. Patricia would hand him a $20 bill and say, "Fix the step before someone breaks their neck," without making eye contact. Tommy would nod, do the work, and leave. What they did not know was that Tommy Chen held a master's degree in forensic accounting from a respected state university and owned a boutique security consulting firm that handled background investigations for 3 federal agencies. He had grown up in a family that ran a laundromat on Bishop Avenue, and he understood that the people who washed the stains out of other people's clothes often saw more than the people who wore them. He and my grandmother had an arrangement. She paid him in pie and conversation, and he kept her informed of the subtle shifts in the family's financial patterns. He was the one who first noticed the suspicious activity in her checking account. The 3 forensic objects that would later become the spine of my case were already in play before the trip, waiting for someone patient enough to see them. The first was the plane ticket stub, an unused, prepaid ticket in Alina Morrison's name for the flight to Rome, booked through a discount agency, and paid for in full by my grandmother's debit card on the 1st of March. I saw the email confirmation on my father's laptop when he left it open on the kitchen counter. He had forwarded it to himself with the subject line, "Alina, do not cancel." The ticket was never canceled. It was simply withheld. My father never intended her to board that plane. He needed her to believe she was going, to hand over the money for the rest of the trip, so that the abandonment would look like a forgetful oversight rather than a premeditated theft. The second object was the bank statement from Alina's account, a single page dated November of the previous year, showing a wire transfer of $30,000 to an account at Brennan and Associates. My grandmother had shown it to me with trembling hands, asking if I thought she had made a mistake. I looked at the transaction ID, the routing number, the exact timestamp. I told her I would look into it. She nodded and put the statement in the drawer where she kept her birthday cards and her husband's obituary, and the recipe for a cake she had not baked since 1994. I took a photograph with my phone and filed it in a folder labeled Grammy Legal. The third object was the irrevocable trust document itself, a thick sheaf of legal paper with the word revocable crossed out in red ink and revised irrevocable written in the margin. It named one beneficiary, Charlotte Ann Morrison. It was funded with exactly $30,000 and the reversionary deed to the family home at 42 Maplewood Lane. The document was dated 4 days after the bank statement. I found it in a manila envelope taped to the underside of my grandmother's mattress, as if she had known she needed to hide it from people who searched her drawers. I read it 3 times, standing in the afternoon light of her bedroom, the smell of lavender and old wood filling my lungs. I did not cry. I did not call my mother. I folded the document, placed it back in its hiding place, and sat down on the edge of the bed with my hands folded in my lap. I understood in that moment that my grandmother had been planning her own defense for months, and that I was the one she trusted to execute it. The first fracture happened on a Tuesday evening in late May, 3 weeks before the trip. I was at my grandmother's cottage, helping her sort through a stack of medical bills that had accumulated on the counter, when Derek came in through the back door without knocking. He had left his phone on the kitchen table while he went out to the garden to take a call, and I watched it vibrate with a cascade of messages from a group chat labeled Family Council. The lock screen was still showing the last message preview. "I think we can move forward with the conservatorship as soon as we get back from Rome. She won't even know what hit her." I did not touch the phone. I did not need to. I had seen enough. I pulled my own phone from my pocket, opened the Notes app, and typed the date and time. Tuesday, May 27, 7:14 p.m. Subject: Possible conservatorship petition referenced in electronic communication. Witness: Charlotte Morrison. Location: Eleanor Morrison's residence. I saved the note and continued sorting the medical bills as if nothing had happened. When Derek came back inside, I looked up and smiled. "Everything okay?" I asked. "It's just business, Char," he said, and pocketed his phone. I nodded and turned back to the papers. That was the moment I stopped being the family's invisible assistant and became something else entirely, something they would not see coming until it was too late to stop. That night, I opened my laptop, created a new file called Morrison Trust Contingency Plan, and began recording every detail I had gathered over the past 3 years. The ticket stub, the bank statement, the trust document, the group chat preview, the dates, the amounts, the names. I typed with the methodical precision of someone who had spent 7 years watching other people's cases fall apart because they had relied on memory instead of documentation. I would not make that mistake. I attached a copy of the trust document I had photographed and wrote a single line at the top of the file. "This is not a request for help. This is a preservation of truth for eventual use." Then I composed an email to Paul Brennan, using the address from the letterhead I had memorized. I wrote, "I am Charlotte Morrison, granddaughter of Eleanor Morrison. I believe I have a document you prepared that requires review in light of recent developments. Please call me at your earliest convenience." I did not send it that night. I scheduled it to send at 8 in the morning, when I knew his office would be open and my family would be too busy packing for their pretend vacation to notice the time stamp. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark of my apartment, the only light coming from the street lamp outside my window. Somewhere across town, my grandmother was sleeping in her cottage, her husband's keychain under her pillow, a trust document taped to her mattress, a $30,000 debt she had never asked to owe hanging over her head like a guillotine blade, and I was the only one who knew that the blade was about to fall on the wrong necks. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my desk and planned a countermeasure that had no name yet, only a shape. A legal action built on paper so solid that no amount of "let's just keep the peace," or "for appearance's sake," or "it's just business, Char" could knock it down. I opened the folder labeled Grammy Legal and added a new subfolder, Paul Brennan Trust Execution. I did not know yet how the pieces would fit together, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The departure gate in 3 weeks would not be the end of the story. It would be the first line of testimony. 5 weeks passed like a held breath. I spent them in the quiet precision of preparation, waking before dawn each day to review the trust documents I had photographed, the bank statement I had archived, the group chat time stamps I had recorded in my notes. I called Paul Brennan on the morning of the second day, and he listened without interrupting while I laid out the sequence of events. The $30,000 wire transfer, the plane ticket that was never canceled but never used, the group chat reference to a conservatorship petition, the deed of reversion taped under my grandmother's mattress. He asked me a single question: "Do you have the original trust document?" I told him where it was. He said he would have a courier pick it up within the hour, and that I should not tell anyone in my family that I had made contact. They will try to discredit you, he said. Let them try. I hung up and resumed my watch. Every few days, I drove to my grandmother's cottage to check on her. She did not ask about the family, and I did not offer. She spent her time in the garden, planting tomatoes that would not ripen until August, and in the evenings she sat in Herbert's old armchair and read paperback mysteries with the covers cracked and the spines broken. I brought her groceries and filled her prescriptions, and I told her that the house was safe, that no one could take it from her, that I had made sure. She nodded as if she had known all along, and she pressed her leather keychain into my palm one afternoon, the one with Herbert's old house key, and said, "You hold this now. You'll know when to use it." I slipped it into my pocket and let the weight of it settle against my hip like a promise. On the fifth Saturday after the departure gate, I received a text from my mother. "We're home. Dinner tonight at 7. For appearance's sake, I expect everyone to be civil." I did not respond. I pulled on my dark blazer, the one with the clean lines and the single gold button, and I pinned my hair back into a low ponytail, sleek, professional, unremarkable. I slipped a folder into my bag, the folder Paul Brennan had given me that morning with a nod and the faintest trace of a smile. Inside were the certified copies of the irrevocable trust, the deed of reversion, and the $30,000 clawback demand. I also carried a single sheet of paper that Paul had drafted, a legal notice of lien against the assets of Gerald and Patricia Morrison for the full amount, plus interest and legal fees. The numbers were exact, the dates were exact, the law was on my side. I put the keychain in my pocket, next to the folder, and I drove to 42 Maplewood Lane. The living room looked like a furniture showroom, designed by someone with no taste and a large budget. My mother had laid out her best china on the dining table, the good set with the gold rims that she only brought out when she wanted to remind guests of her refinement. The white tablecloth was starched and crisp, the napkins folded into fans, the wine glasses arranged in perfect symmetry. My father stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of red wine he had already started, his posture relaxed and triumphant as if he had just returned from a victorious campaign. He was wearing a navy blazer with brass buttons, the same one he wore to funerals and job interviews. My brother Derek was already pouring himself a second glass, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his phone propped against a vase so he could watch a game on the edge of the screen. My mother stood at the head of the table, adjusting a centerpiece of white hydrangeas that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I was wearing black trousers, a white blouse, the gold stud earrings I always wore, and a blazer that had cost $137 on clearance. My bag was a simple leather tote I had bought 3 years ago at a discount store. I looked exactly like the person they expected to see. The assistant, the fixer, the woman who never made demands. I saw the flicker of satisfaction in my mother's eyes when she took in my outfit. She thought I had come to carry their bags and clean up their messes. "Charlotte," she said, in the tone she used to summon waitstaff, "you're late. We started the wine without you." "Hello, Mother," I said. I did not cross the room to greet her. I stood by the doorway, my hand resting on the strap of my bag, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Gerald cleared his throat. "Let's just keep the peace, honey. We had a lovely trip. You should have come, we could have used your help with the luggage." The lie hung in the air like smoke. He knew I had not come because I had walked away at the gate. He knew he had abandoned his own mother. But he said the words with the practiced ease of someone who had been saying them for decades. "It's just business, Char," Derek said from his spot at the table. He did not look up from his phone. "We needed the break. Mom and Dad have been stressed, you understand." He took a sip of wine and set the glass down. "She's fine, right, Grammy, still holding down that house no one wants?" I did not answer. I took a step into the room and I saw my mother's eyes narrow as she noticed the folder in my hand. She was a woman who noticed everything, especially things she was not meant to see. "What's that?" she asked, her voice losing its veneer of hospitality. "It's a trust document," I said, my voice even, unhurried. "The one Grandmother Herbert set up 9 months ago. The one that names me as the sole beneficiary of the irrevocable trust funded with $30,000, the exact amount you took from her account to pay for your vacation." I let the sentence land and watched their faces shift through a sequence of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, the first flush of anger. Patricia laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound, like glass breaking. "That's not possible. We have power of attorney. We handle her finances." She didn't, she stopped. She was looking at the logo on the folder, Brennan and Associates. I saw her hands tighten on the back of a dining chair. Read it, I said. I pulled the document out of the folder, a stack of perhaps 15 pages, and set it on the table beside the hydrangeas. The gold-rimmed china rattled when the pages made contact. Each page is file-stamped, certified, and notarized. The trust was executed on September 14 of last year. The deed of reversion was filed with the county recorder on September 15. The house at 42 Maplewood Lane is now held in trust, with me as the sole trustee. You can no longer sell it, mortgage it, or borrow against it. Gerald set his wine glass down with a thud. Some of the wine sloshed over the rim and spread across the white tablecloth in a dark stain. You can't do this, he said. Your grandmother is not competent. She has dementia. We were going to file a conservatorship. I know, I said. I saw the group chat on Derek's phone. We can move forward with the conservatorship as soon as we get back from Rome. She won't even know what hit her. I took a screenshot. It's saved in a secure location, along with the timestamp and the metadata. If you file a conservatorship petition, I will present that screenshot to the court as evidence of premeditated exploitation of an elderly person. The room went very still. Derek's phone had lowered. His face was pale, the color draining from his cheeks. He looked at my father. He looked at my mother. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Patricia was the first to recover. For appearance's sake, Charlotte, let's discuss this privately. This isn't appropriate. Appearances don't concern me anymore, I said. You abandoned my grandmother at an airport. You stole $30,000 from her account. You plan to take her home and her freedom with a conservatorship. The only reason I'm not filing a police report for elder financial abuse is that I would prefer this be handled civilly. But make no mistake, if you challenge this trust, if you try to sell the house, if you so much as touch her tomato garden, I will bury you in legal fees until your great-grandchildren are paying interest. I turned to my father. You said we never booked you a seat, go back. You said it to the woman who raised you, who paid for your wedding, who spent 60 years believing you were a decent person. You said it to get her out of the way so you could take what she had left. And you thought that was the ending, you thought you had won. And that was only where it began. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the leather keychain. Herbert's old house key shone dully under the overhead light. I held it up so they could see it. This key belongs to the cottage. My grandmother gave it to me. In the event of her death, the cottage passes to me free and clear, as a separate bequest recorded with the trust. You have no claim to it. You have no claim to the main house. You have no claim to the $30,000, which is now subject to a clawback provision with interest accruing from the date of the wire transfer. I placed the keychain on the table beside the trust document. I will be moving into the cottage this weekend. My grandmother will continue to live there for as long as she chooses. You may visit her with my permission, in writing 48 hours in advance. Anything else will be trespassing. I saw my mother's face contort into something I had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, but the raw, naked shock of a woman who had been certain of her control and had just discovered its complete absence. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Derek's wine glass was still in his hand, suspended in midair, forgotten. My father had backed against the fireplace, his hands gripping the mantel as if he needed the support. The stain on the tablecloth had spread to a pale orange rose, seeping into the fabric like a wound. Paul Brennan will be in touch with the formal paperwork, I said. You have 30 days to vacate any claim to the house and to return the $30,000, or we proceed to litigation. I would advise you to consult an attorney before you respond. I picked up the keychain, slipped it back into my pocket, and walked out of the living room without looking back. I drove to the cottage with the windows down, the warm June air tangling my hair, the leather keychain warm against my palm. Tommy Chen was waiting for me on the front porch, a cup of tea in his hand and a knowing look in his eyes. It's done, I said, and he nodded. The documents are filed, he said. I witnessed the courier hand them over to the county clerk myself. The trust is sealed. The lien is recorded. They have no room to maneuver. I sat down beside him on the porch steps and let out the breath I had been holding for 5 weeks. My grandmother came to the door, wiping her hands on an apron, and looked at us with a question in her eyes. I nodded once. She smiled a small, private smile that I had not seen on her face since before Herbert died, and went back inside to her tomatoes. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed in the cottage's spare room, my phone buzzed. It was a photograph from Derek, a selfie of the three of them around the dining table, glasses raised, the wine stain still visible on the cloth. The caption read, "Welcome home, sis, see you in court." They were celebrating. They had no idea. The knock came at 7 the next morning, steady and deliberate, the kind of knock that meant business. I pulled on a cardigan over my nightgown and opened the door to find Paul Brennan standing on the porch, a leather satchel in one hand and a cardboard tray with 2 cups of coffee in the other. His suit was charcoal gray, his tie was a muted burgundy, and his expression was the calm, focused look of a man who had found something he had been looking for. I stepped aside and let him in. My grandmother was already in the kitchen, brewing tea, and she nodded at him as though she had been expecting him. She had been expecting him. In a way, she had signed the trust documents in his office 9 months ago, and she remembered his face the way she remembered the faces of people who had kept their promises. We sat at the small kitchen table, the morning light slanting through the window and catching the dust motes suspended in the air. Paul set down the coffee and opened his satchel, pulling out a manila folder that was thicker than the one he had given me yesterday. He laid out the contents in a neat row: bank statements, loan applications, a copy of a forged power of attorney, and a series of time-stamped photographs from a security camera at a branch of First National Bank. The images showed my father and my mother at the teller counter, both of them smiling, both of them calm, both of them signing documents that had my grandmother's name on them. They executed a home equity line of credit on the main house 6 months before the trip, Paul said, his voice flat and professional, as if he were reading a weather report. $85,000. They used Eleanor's name, her social security number, and a forged signature on the application. They also filed a fraudulent durable power of attorney that gave them access to her safe deposit box at the same bank. From that box, they removed a series of savings bonds issued in Herbert's name, with a total face value of $22,000. Those bonds were cashed at a separate branch 3 days later. I looked at the documents. The forged power of attorney was dated 8 months ago, the notary stamp smudged enough to be questionable, the signature a clumsy imitation of my grandmother's hand. The loan application for the home equity line showed the property address at 42 Maplewood Lane and listed Gerald Morrison as the borrower. The bank had processed it without verifying the power of attorney's validity, which meant they were also exposed to liability. I noted that detail in my head and filed it away. $85,000, I repeated. Where did the money go? Paul pulled out a second set of statements. $42,000 went to pay off Gerald's credit cards, 3 accounts with balances near the limit. Another $28,000 went to a car loan on Patricia's Lexus. The remaining $15,000 was deposited into Derek's personal checking account 5 days later, with a memo reading business investment. I have confirmed that Derek used $10,000 of that to pay off his own student loans and kept the other $5,000 as cash. My grandmother set her teacup down with a soft clink. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were fixed on the documents as if she were watching a fire consume something she had loved. Herbert bought those bonds with his deployment bonus from the Navy, she said quietly. He meant them for Charlotte's education. He said she was the only one who ever read the books he gave her. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. 52 years of marriage, 9 years of widowhood, and they had stolen the last gift her husband had left for her. I did not scream. I did not cry. I set my coffee cup down on the table and noticed the way Paul's thumb was tapping a slow rhythm against the edge of the folder, a man counting the seconds until the trap closed. This is fraud, I said. It's bank fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. The penalties are substantial. 7 to 15 years per count, depending on the jurisdiction, Paul said. And that's before we add conspiracy. The group chat you photographed provides evidence of premeditation. We can have indictments within 60 days. I shook my head. Not yet, they still think they have control. Let them keep thinking that. Let them reach out to me. Let them put everything in writing. Paul nodded. He understood. He packed the documents back into his satchel, leaving copies on the table with a notation at the top. Exhibits A through F, Morrison Family Trust Investigation. I placed them in a locked drawer in my grandmother's writing desk, next to the original trust document and the leather keychain. The drawer now held a small archive of betrayal, each piece of paper a brick in a wall that was slowly rising around the people I had once called family. They contacted me within 24 hours. Patricia called at 9 in the morning, her voice silk over steel. Charlotte, I think we need to have a conversation. For appearance's sake, I want to resolve this before it gets unpleasant. I told her I was busy. She suggested dinner the following evening. I said I would think about it. An hour later, Gerald sent a text. Let's just keep the peace. I've talked to a lawyer and she says you don't have a case, but I'm willing to offer you a settlement. Let's talk. I did not respond. Derek followed up at noon with a message that read, "It's just business, Char, don't make this personal, Mom's really upset." I did not respond to that either, but I saved each message in a folder labeled Communication Log Defendants. I took screenshots. I recorded the time stamps. I let the file grow. The calls escalated on the second day. Patricia left a voicemail that began with, "For appearance's sake, Charlotte, you are making yourself look foolish," and ended with, "If you do not come to dinner tomorrow, I will assume you have chosen to sever all ties with this family." Gerald called twice, each time with a tone that shifted from conciliatory to threatening, finally landing on, "You will regret this, Charlotte. I am your father." The last call of the day came from a number I did not recognize. It was a lawyer, a woman named Sarah Coombs from a firm I did not know, who informed me that she was representing the Morrison family in a dispute regarding an alleged trust, and that I should direct all further communication through her. I told her I would have my attorney respond. I hung up and added her contact information to the file. That evening, I sat on the porch with Tommy Chen, watching the fireflies begin their slow dance across the garden. He had brought a pot of tea and a plate of my grandmother's shortbread cookies, and he was wearing his tool belt even though there was nothing to fix. It was a habit, he said, like a soldier keeping his boots laced. I told him about the phone calls, the texts, the lawyer. He listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was bleeding orange and gold into the sky. "They want you to come to dinner," he said. It was not a question. I said I would think about it. "And will you?" I turned the leather keychain over in my palm, feeling the ridges of Herbert's old key against my skin. Yes, but not to surrender. The next morning, I sent a brief text to Patricia. "I'll be at dinner, 7 o'clock. She responded with a single word, "Good." I saved the message and opened the filing cabinet I had set up in the cottage's spare bedroom. On the desk were 3 manila envelopes, organized by color: red for legal exhibits, blue for financial records, white for correspondence. Each envelope was stamped with the date and a tracking number in black ink. I had learned that skill, the meticulous organization of evidence, from 7 years of watching paralegals lose cases because they could not produce documents fast enough. I would not make that mistake. I had a master log on my laptop that listed every item, every timestamp, every witness. I had 2 copies of every document, one in the filing cabinet, one in a fireproof safe bolted to the floor of the closet. I had a digital backup stored on a secure server that Paul Brennan had provided. Tommy arrived at noon with a box of supplies: document sleeves, a label maker, archival quality folders, and a portable scanner. He set them on the desk and opened his own laptop, showing me a spreadsheet he had created that mapped the entire timeline of financial transactions. He had color-coded each one: red for theft, yellow for deception, green for traces that led to legal violations. The precision of his work was clinical, almost beautiful. "Where did you learn to do this?" I asked. "My father ran a laundromat," he said, not looking up from the screen. He had a notebook behind the counter where he recorded every customer, every machine cycle, every dime that went into the coin box. Said, "If you want to catch a thief, you have to know the pattern of honest money first." I spent my summers watching him track shortages to the nickel. Forensic accounting is just that same instinct, scaled up. He tapped a column on the spreadsheet. The HELOC application was signed on a Thursday afternoon. The signature matches Patricia's handwriting from a sample I obtained from a business check she wrote to my father for a plumbing repair. I compared the loops on the E and the M, they are identical. "Is that admissible?" "It's not a certified handwriting analysis," he said, "but it's enough to persuade a judge to issue a subpoena, and once they compel the original bank documents, the forgery will be obvious to any expert." He closed the laptop and looked at me with a calm intensity. "You have all the evidence you need. The only question is how you want to use it." I looked at the 3 envelopes on the desk. The red one contained the trust documents and the deed of reversion. The blue one contained the HELOC application, the forged power of attorney, and the savings bond records. The white one contained the screenshots, the voicemail transcripts, the lawyer's contact information. Together, they formed a narrative of theft, deception, and cruelty that no judge could ignore. "I want them to see it coming," I said. "I want them to look at the evidence laid out on the table and understand that they did this to themselves." Tommy nodded. "Then you need to be in that living room tomorrow night. You need to sit at that table. You need to let them say everything they are planning to say. And when they are done, when they think they have won, you open the folder. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I printed fresh copies of every document, arranged them in a leather folio that I had bought for $15 at an office supply store. I clipped a pen to the inside pocket and placed the folio in my bag next to the keychain. I set my alarm for 6. I laid out my clothes, the same black trousers, the same white blouse, the same dark blazer, no jewelry except the gold studs, no makeup except a light touch. I wanted to look exactly like the woman they had always seen, the invisible fixer, the quiet assistant, the one who never caused trouble. I wanted them to underestimate me until the very last second. That evening, as I sat in the cottage kitchen, eating a bowl of soup my grandmother had made, my phone buzzed with a group message. It was from Derek. Char, just a heads up, Mom is going to offer you a deal tomorrow. Take it, it's the best you're going to get. I did not reply. A moment later, another message. Seriously, you don't want to see her when she's really angry. I took a screenshot and filed it. The night before the reckoning, I walked through the cottage room by room, checking that everything was secure. My grandmother was already asleep, her breath even and peaceful, the leather keychain now hanging from the bedpost where she could see it when she woke. I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her for a long moment. She had raised my father. She had loved him. She had trusted him. And he had taken her money, her home, her dignity, and tried to take her freedom. The trust document she had signed in Paul Brennan's office was not just a legal instrument, it was her last act of defiance, her final gift to the one person who had never stopped showing up. I went to the spare room, opened the filing cabinet, and pulled out the white envelope. I added one more item, a printed copy of the group chat screenshot, with the date and time circled in red ink. I sealed the envelope, wrote Exhibit G communication log on the front, and placed it next to the others. They thought I was coming to surrender. They had set out the good china again. They had rehearsed their speeches. They had warned me, threatened me, dismissed me. They had no idea that tomorrow, at the very table where they had toasted my defeat, I would lay down a folder that would end their illusion of victory forever. The dining room was the same as it had been 5 weeks ago. The starched white tablecloth, the gold-rimmed china, the hydrangeas in the center, the crystal glasses catching the overhead light. My mother had even set out the silver candlesticks that she only brought down for Christmas, as if tonight were a celebration rather than an interrogation. Patricia stood at the head of the table, dressed in a cream silk blouse with a gold necklace that I recognized as a gift from my grandmother on their 30th anniversary. Gerald was already seated, a glass of scotch in front of him, his posture carefully arranged to convey authority. Derek sat across from him, scrolling through his phone with the studied disinterest of someone who believed he was above the proceedings. He did not look up when I entered. Sarah Coombs, the family's lawyer, was seated at the far end of the table, a sheaf of papers in front of her and an expression of professional skepticism on her face. I stood in the doorway, my folio in one hand, my tote bag over my shoulder. I had not changed my outfit from the morning: black trousers, white blouse, dark blazer, gold stud earrings, a single thin silver watch that had cost $37. I had erased every trace of emotion from my face. I was not here to argue. I was here to present. Charlotte, Patricia said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Sit, we have a proposal for you. I did not sit. I walked to the table, set my folio down on the empty chair and opened it. The family's lawyer leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Miss Morrison, I have advised my clients that they are prepared to offer you a settlement, $100,000 in exchange for your full release of any claims against the estate. You will also sign a non-disclosure agreement. I looked at her. Then I looked at my mother. Then I looked at my father, who was very carefully not meeting my eyes. No, I said. Patricia's smile tightened. Charlotte, for appearance's sake, I think you should at least hear the offer. We are being generous. You are being desperate, I said. I have seen the HELOC. I have seen the forged power of attorney. I have seen the savings bonds that you cashed using a fake signature. I have the group chat where you planned the conservatorship. I have the timestamps, the screenshots, the metadata. I have the bank surveillance photographs. Gerald's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Derek's phone lowered. Patricia's face went through a sequence I had seen before but never aimed at me. The faint tightening at the corners of her mouth, the barely perceptible flicker in her eyes, the slow, deliberate inhale through her nose. She had been caught. She did not know how I knew, but she knew I was telling the truth. That is not possible, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. I reached into my folio and pulled out the first exhibit, the plane ticket stub, the unused, prepaid ticket in Eleanor Morrison's name for the flight to Rome. You never intended her to board this plane, I said, setting it on the tablecloth. You needed her to believe she was going so she would hand over the $30,000 for expenses. Then you abandoned her at the gate so you could file for conservatorship while she was supposedly confused and disoriented. The ticket was never canceled. It was simply withheld. I have the email confirmation from your own laptop, forwarded to yourself with the subject line, Eleanor, do not cancel. I pulled out the second exhibit, the bank statement showing the $30,000 wire transfer to Brennan and Associates. This is the money she gave you for the trip. She paid for every seat. And when you left her behind, you did not return the money. You treated it as your own. I pulled out the third exhibit, the irrevocable trust document, certified and notarized, with the deed of reversion stapled to the back. This is what she did with that money. She funded a trust in my name. The trust holds the deed to the house at 42 Maplewood Lane, the same house you tried to borrow $85,000 against using a forged power of attorney. I laid it flat on the table, the edge of the paper touching the gold-rimmed china. The $30,000 you stole is a mirror. It is exactly what she put into the trust. You tried to take it from her and she turned it into the instrument that takes everything from you. Derek stood up. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous, he said. You think you can just walk in here and sit down, Derek, I said. My voice was flat, unhurried. He did not sit. I have a screenshot of the group chat where you wrote, we can move forward with the conservatorship as soon as we get back from Rome. I have a time-stamped record of the text you sent me yesterday telling me to take the deal. I have every voicemail your mother left, every threat your father made, every attempt to intimidate me into silence. It is all in this folder, organized, logged, and ready to be submitted to the court. Sarah Coombs cleared her throat. Miss Morrison, I must advise you that making accusations without proof. I have proof, I said. I opened the folio and slid the bank surveillance photographs across the table. My father's face in sharp focus at the teller counter. My mother beside him, her hand holding a pen, her signature on a document that was not hers. Your clients forged my grandmother's name on a HELOC application. They face federal charges of bank fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. 7 to 15 years per count. I have the original bank records, certified by the branch manager with time stamps that match the photographs. The room was silent. The lawyer picked up the photographs, her face unreadable. Patricia's hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Gerald had not moved, his scotch still hovering midair. Derek was standing, his mouth half open, his eyes fixed on the photographs as if they were a crime scene. Now, I said, I am going to walk out of this house. Paul Brennan will file the legal actions tomorrow morning. You have until 9 o'clock to return the $30,000 in full, with interest, and to sign a document relinquishing all claims to the property. In exchange, I will not pursue criminal charges for the bond theft or the HELOC fraud, provided that you also agree to a permanent restraining order preventing you from contacting my grandmother or myself by any means. And if we do not? Patricia asked, her voice barely audible. Then I will submit this entire folder to the district attorney's office, along with a written statement of the facts. They will decide whether to prosecute. I closed the folio. I tucked it under my arm. I looked at my father, who had finally lowered his glass and was staring at the tablecloth as if the answers were written there. You said, we never booked you a seat, go back. You thought you had erased her. But you only made her legacy stronger. I walked out of the dining room without looking back. Behind me, I heard the sound of china shattering, a single plate thrown against a wall, the sharp crack of porcelain meeting plaster. Patricia's voice high and sharp. Gerald, do something. Gerald's voice low and hollow. There's nothing to do. I got in my car and drove to the cottage. The leather keychain was warm in my pocket. The next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, Paul Brennan received a wire transfer of $32,700, the original $30,000 plus interest calculated to the day. An hour later, a courier delivered a signed quitclaim deed from Gerald and Patricia Morrison, surrendering any interest in the property at 42 Maplewood Lane. The document had been notarized at a storefront legal service, witnessed by a clerk who later testified that both parties had seemed agitated but cooperative. I placed the deed in the filing cabinet, next to the trust documents. I locked the drawer and pocketed the key. The real fallout arrived within 72 hours. The bank that had issued the HELOC conducted an internal investigation and discovered the forged signature. They froze the account and demanded immediate repayment of the full $85,000, plus penalties and legal fees. Gerald and Patricia did not have the cash. They tried to sell their car, but the Lexus was repossessed before they could complete the transaction. Derek's engagement, a wedding that was scheduled for the following month, was called off after his fiancée's family learned of the criminal investigation. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Derek had moved into a rented room on the other side of town, working a job that paid hourly. Gerald called me once. His voice was different, no longer commanding, no longer paternal. He sounded old. "Charlotte," he said, "I know I cannot ask for your forgiveness. But I want you to know that I did not plan any of this. I went along. I always went along. Your mother, he stopped, the silence stretched. You walked away at that gate," he said finally. "I should have walked away with you." I did not respond to that. I saved the recording of the call in my evidence file, 7 years of silence, the silence of the enabler. He said the word I would later return to, but I did not forgive him. Not then. Patricia did not call. She sent a letter, handwritten on cream stationery, delivered to the cottage by certified mail. It was 3 pages long, alternating between threats and pleas, ending with a line that read, "You have destroyed this family. For appearance's sake, I hope you're satisfied." I filed the letter without reading it twice. I did not respond. 6 months passed. The seasons turned from summer to winter and back to spring. My grandmother's tomatoes flourished in the garden, and I painted the cottage's peeling trim a soft sage green, the color of new growth. Tommy Chen came by every Friday to drink tea on the porch. He no longer wore the tool belt. He had become a familiar presence in the cottage, someone who knew the shape of our quiet life without needing to fill it with noise. Paul Brennan sent a quarterly report on the trust, which had grown modestly through conservative investments. The $30,000 was still intact, a reminder that what had been meant for theft had become the foundation of our security. I drove past the house on Maplewood Lane once, a month after the deed was filed. The lawn was overgrown. The hydrangeas had wilted. The for sale sign had been up for 60 days. I did not stop. I kept driving, one hand on the wheel, the other holding the leather keychain that had belonged to Herbert. It hung from the rearview mirror now, the key catching the light in quick flashes, a small piece of him that moved through the world with me. One evening in late August, I sat in the cottage garden with a cup of tea, the sun setting behind the trees, the air thick with the smell of earth and ripening fruit. My grandmother was inside, listening to an old radio program, the sound drifting through the open window like a memory. Tommy had left an hour ago, after helping me stake the tomato plants. The garden was quiet. The sky was the color of bruised peaches. If you have ever sat through a dinner where your own blood treated you like an invisible stranger, if you have ever watched the people who should have protected you rewrite reality in real time, then you already know the truths I am about to say. I learned them the hard way, but I give them to you freely. Use them in whatever war you are fighting. The first truth is this: narcissistic families weaponize your sense of duty. They count on you to comply so they never have to change. They will call you selfish, cruel, ungrateful. They will tell you that family is everything. But family is not a contract you signed at birth, it is a relationship that must be earned and maintained. The moment they stop treating you with basic dignity, they have forfeited the title. The second truth is this: the silence of the enabler is just as damaging as the cruelty of the architect. Both choose comfort over courage. My father did not strike anyone. He did not shout. He simply sat in his armchair and let it happen, because confrontation was uncomfortable. That silence cost my grandmother her home, her savings, her peace of mind. Do not mistake quiet for harmless. The third truth is this: money is often the final test of a family's loyalty. Watch how they treat the person who gave them everything, because that is how they will treat you. My grandmother handed over $30,000 in good faith, and they used it to plan her imprisonment. If someone you love is willing to steal from the old and the vulnerable, there is no corner of your life they would not eventually pillage. The fourth truth is this: you do not need to fight dirty to win. You just need to know the rules better than they do and to have the right paper on your side. I did not scream at them. I did not threaten them. I documented every betrayal, built a file, and let the legal system do what it was designed to do: hold people accountable for their actions. Intimidation is a weapon that only works on those who do not have a plan. I had a plan. The fifth truth, and the one I carry closest: walking away from a toxic family is not a loss. It is the first step toward building a life where you do not have to survive, you can finally thrive. I left 42 Maplewood Lane with nothing but a keychain and a trust document. Now I have a garden, a cottage, a grandmother who sleeps peacefully, and a quiet contentment that no amount of their approval could have ever given me. I picked up the keychain from the rearview mirror and ran my thumb over the worn ridges of Herbert's key. It had unlocked the door to this garden. It had unlocked the door to my future. Some locks, I have learned, can only be opened by someone who refuses to abandon the person they love. If this story meant something to you, if it has given you even a fraction of the clarity that building that file gave me, I ask you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who is sitting in a living room right now, replaying the same silent betrayals, wondering if they have the strength to walk away. Show them that they do. This is Charlotte Morrison. Keep your boundaries strong. Guard your peace, and I will see you in the next.